on legal research beyond the contemporary or conventional areas. Today, we are fortunate to have with us Dr. Nisha, who is a postdoctoral fellow at International Institute of Asian Studies, working on a very peculiar topic related to Indian circus. We're fortunate to have Nisha, particularly because she's literally a researcher who's traveled around the globe for the purpose of a research on different fellowship. And she carries the unique value of working on a very peculiar area, again, on legal history. As a historian, Nisha has been curious about different aspects, and her research areas particularly focus on certain aspects of legal history. We would love to hear more about her areas and how she has ventured into different aspects, making legal history a researchable area. Over to Nisha, especially. And Nisha, thank you so much for joining this channel to share your experience. And I'm very sure so many of the researchers will be inspired listening to you. Nisha, could you please give a brief about your background before you go into the topic on legal history?
Thank you so much, Rhea. It's a pleasure to be here. And I do social history, in fact. It's actually my research on the social history of Indian circus that brought me into looking at certain aspects regarding legal history, which connects with your research too. I mean, on India and on the legalities concerning the circus community. So as part of my research, which I've been more or less doing in India, in Africa, in the United States, and now in the Netherlands, which was more or less on various fellowships. In India, I was a Papia Ghosh Memorial Fellow for my PhD, which was more or less for a fellowship for women scholars meant by the Center for Studies in Calcutta, CCCC Yale. And then after my PhD, I traveled to Lund in Sweden, where I was a Sassnet Fellow. And from there, I actually had a fellowship in UK, where I was on a Charles Wallace Fellowship. And prior to the International Institute in the Netherlands, I was a fellow at Yale University on the Fulbright Fellowship. And I spent almost like 3 years in South Africa researching on various histories of the circus and acrobatics on 2 institutes, in fact, the University of the Witwatersrand and Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Study, where I was a fellow, And I was a Mellon SSRC fellow with the University of the Witwatersrand. And so this is actually my research that enabled me to travel across the world. And I met many scholars, and it's been like, meeting people, meeting acrobats, and meeting animal trainers who have been working in the circuses for the past, century and a half. So as part of my book, Jumbos and Jumping Doubles, A Social History of Indian Circus, which was published with Oxford University Press in 2020, I in fact traveled across India meeting circus acrobats, entrepreneurs, ring boys, contract laborers, interviewing all of them,
Wow. I mean, this explains your passion for research. And I'm sure so many of the researchers who would have doubted themselves, this very profile of yours should inspire them to take it beyond just their degree and see it as something they are very passionate about. So taking forward, we would like to focus particularly on the concept of legal history, since I had an opportunity to attend one of the sessions that you had given in Leiden University Faculty of Law, which covered various legal history aspects as well. So could you give a little more brief about how you've touched upon legal history in your research particularly?
Yeah, in that talk, that was an interesting talk, which I gave at the law faculty in Leiden University. as part of my book, Jumbos and Jumping Doubles, A Social History of Indian Circus, I actually researched on the two major legal interventions by the Indian state into the lives of the circus community. In 1991, Environment Ministry of India initiated a ban on the performance of certain wild animals. Mm-hmm. And in a similar way, on 18th April 2011, another ban was issued on the performance of children below 14 in the circus industry. And later on, it was made into 18 for adolescents and youth, you know. So the non-governmental organizations involved in these campaigns, which actually gave a helping hand in initiating these bans, ran campaigns against the circuses. And as part of the ban, the court directed simultaneous raids to liberate the circuses and animals, you know. So my research has more or less been trying to ask questions like, what are the ramifications of such a legal intervention, you know? What happened to these children and animals rescued from the circuses? It's more of a binary of emancipation and cruelty that come up with these legal and civilian discourses, you know. And I'm actually looking at these perspectives and the limitations of this framework. Mm-hmm. My major questions have been like discourses on human and animal rights, child trafficking, along with fuzzy borders in the face of livelihood and survival. So this is where my legal history research started, you know. I needed to place these two legal bans in their social, political, and historical context. The bans were fateful in the lives of the circus community, thousands of artists and circus workers roaming around the country. And it has become a significant moment in the memory of many of these circus community, you know. Even those who had retired from the trade long before the ban would start with some statement about its aftermath. Mm-hmm. So through the lens of the legal bans, I looked at the larger history of animal performances and the history of domestication of animals. How did children reach the circuses in South Asia? Of course, colonialism, slavery, racism, global economy, livelihood, caste, and other gender inequalities, which are larger than the circuses, played a major role in shaping the childhood in South Asia, right? I mean, not just in South Asia, the global South, I would say. So what are the transformations that happened over centuries in many parts of the globe on human and animal rights? How did the humanitarian notions transform over the years? And what are the ethical and philosophical aspects that contributed to it? Over the past few decades, many countries have issued partial and total ban on animal performances in the circuses, nationwide and provincially. 2009, Bolivia was the first nation to ban all animals from the circuses, both domestic and wild, you know. Mm-hmm. So I felt that it's important to understand how the history and evolution of law shape the modern system of justice. You know, I think an in-depth study of the legal history would bring in interdisciplinary dialogues and approaches, both to law as well as history, as two separate disciplines that can contribute to each other. Law plays a significant role in our present-day lives, right? While history would help us to understand their past and their present-day connections too. The transformations that happened in the past that shaped the present, you know. So it's a significant field of study. where which even even in a in a research like mine, which is more or less a social history research, played a major role. But the interesting thing is that many of the post-colonial regions follow the colonial law that was established by colonizers more or less to curtail and enslave them, even though the legal system has undergone changes after many of these countries gained independence from the European colonizers. For instance, we can ask such questions like, why do we have police stations all over the world? What is its closely connected history to colonialism? Why are police atrocious to the sex workers or sexual minorities in the post-colonial country like India, the largest democracy in the world, right? Legal histories enables one to challenge the assumptions and prejudices embedded in the law. It should challenge the lawyers and jurists to construct new frameworks in the legal system that democratically includes everyone and marginalizes none. An egalitarian society for the civilians definitely needs to be the larger aim. For instance, if you look at the children who reached the circuses in South Asia, they were mostly from subaltern castes and communities, So circuses definitely played an alternate space and given a livelihood option for many children from subaltern communities and castes, especially in the Indian subcontinent, all over South Asia, but especially in the Indian subcontinent. Over the past century and a half, the circus rings have witnessed the heroic transformation of many ordinary lives into great performers. But this aspect was completely absent from the legal discourses, I'm just citing an instance.
Right.
So yeah, over to you, Rhea.
Yes, so I was just curious to know that you've also mentioned you traveled with them through the country and likewise, and I believe you were also part of the circus when this band came in. Did you see what were their perception about this particular band, considering, again, going back to the history, how this circus has shaped their life for better? So what was their perspective, if you could draw in some light?
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much for that question. I mean, I was more or less traveling with the circuses across India. And also, I belong to this small town called Talasheri, and which is known as a circus town. And my research, in fact, my interest in the circus history is, in fact, has a lot to do with my being from this hometown, from this small town called Talasheri. Talasheri has often been known as the town of three C's: cricket, cake, and the circus. And many of us from this small town believe that all of these three originated from, originated in the small town in India with our colonial past, So I, in fact, was many of my neighbors and many of those who were part of the circus as acrobats were, in fact, from this small town called Talasheri, So it's when I began to understand that apart from the mythical tales about the origin of the circus, many from my hometown were going to the circuses in the early 20th century as acrobats, ring boys, entrepreneurs. A better part of early 20th century witnessed their journeys to all the circus companies around the world. So there's this person from my hometown, Kannan Bombayo. Kannan Bombayo, in 1928, at the age of 22, he's supposed to have traveled to Britain and then afterwards to America. In Britain, he worked with the British Buttermilk Circus. And he has been working in other circuses too in Europe. And in America, he has been with the Ringling Brothers with a salary of $400, So Kannan's encounter with Adolf Hitler is legendary among the circus community. So when Kannan performed in front of Adolf Hitler, it is said that he was taken aback by the performance of Kannan on a slack rope, known as rope dance, and exclaimed the jumping devil of India, which was that oscillating moment where the Führer's myth of Aryan supremacy gets demolished. So these are the stories that I heard from the circus workers who were in my hometown, and were also, whom I met across India. So when the legal ban came, this actually ruptured the livelihood of many animal trainers and children who were more or less from the subaltern communities. So from the perspective of the circus community, it actually shattered their livelihood, and they were completely it was actually a part of their collective memory that people would just begin telling their stories that, this ban happened and all the wild animals are gone, or like now children are not there. They've been performing exclusively these items called Chinese boneless, or on the pole, or seesaw acrobat. All these acrobatics were exclusively performed by children, and many of the trainers have told me that it's extremely difficult for an adult body to learn it, because children's body, like any other physical culture, like Kalaripayattu or gymnastics, the trainers believed that is easier to train and believed to be supple, than an adult's body. So this perspective was so much there, and almost like 40,000 animal trainers, tamers, helpers lost their job, and many of them were complaining that many of the animals that were taken away as part of these bans did not even reach the zoos turned to rescue centers, 5 zoos turned to rescue centers around the country. So that was something which was quite shattering for them, I mean.
Absolutely. Because just before we conclude, just one more question. As you rightly mentioned, most of these decisions that you had to evaluate kind of excluded the historical part to it. Now, let me ask you, say, suppose they had taken the history into consideration, do you believe that the decision would have varied, like, say, for instance, how they would have perceived the engagement of children, or how they would have perceived the way animals were engaged, the relationship between the trainers? Do you think that would have made a drastic difference in the way the decision came out?
I think it's important to know the history,
Right.
Because when I started research, I understood that animal performances have a larger history other than circuses, and same is the case with children. I mean, what happened to these children after they were rescued from the circuses? Many of them did not have a home to go back. What were the options left for these children? It's probably either beggary or starving or sex work maybe. So but at the same time, many of these children, like as in the case of Kannan Bombayo, choosing circus as a profession actually gave them a lot of openings, right? I mean, livelihood option with dignity, which actually made them into great performers. And Of course, all is not well with the circuses. There are cases of sexual labor or other exploitations, but that happens in that has that actually makes us think about the larger non-egalitarian world in which we exist, in which we live, right? I mean, it's a world with where we face many kind of inequalities on gender, race, caste. So that's not something that is particular to the circuses.
Right,
So
right.
the ban on animals actually affected a marginalized group of people like the circus or the snake charmers or the Kalanda community who were traditionally bad trainers,
Right.
but it did not affect certain other dominant groups and spaces, such as elephants in the religious places or
True.
the traditional animal fighting for sport, Jallikattu, for instance.
Right.
Yeah, so I would say that it was easier. It was not easier for the legal system to put a ban on elephants. So I mean, the five wild animals were tigers, monkeys, lions, bears, and leopards.
Right, right. Okay.
But the interesting thing is that even dogs could make it into this list of ban, which were later on substituted with lions. But elephants could not make it into this list, which is quite interesting for me as a researcher, to note. And a ban on elephants would not have been easier for the legal system in India, because many of these temple festivals, traditional temple festivals, have been more or less conducted by temple management bodies like the Devaswam Board, for instance, which has a strong political party support, or the Elephants Owners Association, again with political support. It's a triggering questions that why they are not even considered as performances, while certain performances become legitimate, while certain others, like the circus, become illegitimate. And this is
Treated
something
as an art form.
Yes,
Right?
yes. It's also an triggering question. Or something like Jallikattu, where the Tamil Nadu, I mean, it's been held as a traditional Tamil sport, right? An agrarian sport. And in fact, the states and central governments sought to lift the Supreme Court ban on this agrarian bullfighting, Jallikattu, by amending provisions in the law.
Right.
Related to the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. I mean, this is bullfighting. I mean, this is something which is, again, atrocious to animals. But how does certain performances or certain spaces become legitimate is a question that I would want to ask in this. Similar things happened with Mexico in 2015, where again, an animal ban was issued, and many of these animals, lions, tigers, elephants, and zebras, echoing the condition in India, many of these animals reach the black market. The Mexican circus artists, in fact, made protest performances in the city square and, against the ban, to lift this legal ban. But with a thriving market outside, many of these animals reach the black market outside of. And we need to understand that Mexico is a country with bullfighting, cockfighting, rodeos, which are legal in Mexico, and with this, at the same time, there was this ban that was issued in the circuses, particularly to circuses, which prompts one to ask. I mean, these conditions, in fact, prompts one to ask whether a change of ownership from the circus to the zoos, in fact, make any change in the real suffering of animals. This is actually disconnected legal histories that enabled me as a researcher to look at these legal bans and circus histories in a transnational context, with Mexico and other countries from the global South being one of them. Some of those countries where similar things have happened. So yeah,
that's brilliant. I mean, the way you have brought in the legal aspect as a social scientist, to bring in that legal aspect simply shows how none of this can be done in a silos. And you as a researcher have gone in depth with the aspect of legal history itself. That shows the relevance also of legal history while coming out with a particular statute or particular ban, the consideration that the courts must be taking into. And I really hope the researchers start considering legal history as an area of research and not just stay with the traditional aspects, looking beyond just the legal principles to know that we are all, in fact, are products of our history. And bringing that aspect in would definitely be contributory.
Thank you so much, Rhea. I mean, that's so like, I hope, people take it up seriously and look at the history of it, or also what happened after the legal bans,
Right.
which is more or less would be like legal anthropology.
Right.
And many of these, another thing that actually helped me understand is that, I mean, with this legal history research, is that many of these human rights and animal rights have been more or less rooted in the West, which
Right.
proved completely unsuitable for the global South context. For instance, as in India, I mean, like where children are more or less without options, much livelihood options,
Mhm.
and or in Latin America, for instance, where children take up as acrobatics as a means of, or in Africa, where they see acrobatics, learning acrobatics, they are in fact earning a livelihood, and which is enabling them to travel across the world.
True.
And in my research in East Africa, I was more or less meeting African acrobats who were quite trained, who self-trained themselves, who trained themselves in small schools where they were learning acrobatics, and they embody this art, right? I mean, they
Right.
embody their livelihood. So and which is enabling them to travel across the world. And I met like girls of 14 and 15 who have traveled almost the same number as their age, 14
Wow.
countries, yeah, which is amazing.
I'm
So, yeah.
sure. I believe, next time in future, at least these factors get into consideration and get noticed by the courts before any of these bans come in place, because we've seen in practice how it's usually the first reaction is to ban an activity prior to looking at how it can be implemented. For instance, I think we were discussing about how the rehabilitation could be done. This, in fact, would be connected to the historical relationship as well. And I really hope this comes into consideration. But then again, thank you so much for taking this time out and discussing with us the importance of the area, giving an opportunity and information to wide researchers who would be curious to explore the area in different aspects. You've given them hope, you've given them a chance to venture into different opportunities. And yes, thank you so much, Dr. Nisha, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much, Rhea. This was my pleasure to be here and interacting with you. And I do hope that I get another opportunity to interact with you again, in this platform. And thank you so much again. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.